Okay, friends, let me welcome you to this very interesting and important discussion on US-Pakistan relations, new opportunities and old challenges. We didn't know that Imran Khan, the Prime Minister of Pakistan, was going to visit the US when we were planning this. So it's really, I think, worked out timing-wise, I think, excellent. That there was generally talk he might go, but we didn't really know. And the subject, of course, has become a lot more, interesting and important today, given much that has happened during Prime Minister Khan's visit to Washington. There is talk about a reset in the relationship. It's a relationship that's been a very close one, dating back to the mid-50s, when Pakistan was part of CENTO, the alliance system that Washington had created in Asia. There was a bilateral defense treaty that goes back to 1954. So it's a long and deep relationship, but it's also been a complex one. I'm sure Ambassador Hussain will explain that, gone through many ups and downs, that there were times when it seemed the most allied of the relationships. There were times when Pakistan was one of the most sanctioned countries in the world by the United States. So there is a lot of richness, a lot of context. There's a lot of nuance in this relationship. We are really fortunate to have Ambassador Tawqir Hussain Saab today with us. He's been visiting us the last few weeks. This is the first time he's joined us. There's no one better than him to talk about this subject. He's been part of the Pakistan Foreign Service. He's been served as diplomat in many places. He's currently based in Washington. He teaches he used to teach at Johns Hopkins, but now adjunct faculty at the Georgetown University. So he's been a long-time follower of the relationship, and he served in high capacities in Islamabad, so he knows the context and background. I'm also delighted to welcome Ambassador, the new High Commissioner of Pakistan. Thank you for joining us, ma'am, and we look forward to keeping in touch. One of our main jobs here is to follow contemporary South Asia, and we really look to the embassies of all the 8 countries. Not all of them are here, but at least most of them. So we really look forward to engaging you during your tenure here, because Pakistan is quite high on the priorities of ISIS, and we welcome you to ISIS for the first time. So I'll stop here. Ambassador Tawqir Hussain, the floor is yours. You can speak for about half an hour and then we'll wait.
Thank you, Dr. Rajamohan. Very honored to be speaking to this learned audience at one of the premier global academic institutions, National University of Singapore. And doubly honored and pleased because I've always held Dr. Rajamohan in very high esteem, and have been sort of following his readings for the more than past 1 decade, and recommended his writings to my students. So I was very pleased when I was offered the opportunity to come here for this fellowship. As I said, on 2 counts, because of the internationally acclaimed status of the university, as well as his personal eminent status as an academic, and I wanted to spend some time with him. As Dr. Rajamohan mentioned, it's a very complex relationship. In fact, I would say one of the most talked about relationships and one of the least understood. First, I'm going to explain with a brief historical review why this is so. History is important to understanding of this relationship. Then I will address, as Dr. Rajamohan mentioned, the recent state of affairs leading up to Prime Minister Imran Khan's visit to Washington and its follow-up. Finally, I will look at what the future holds for this relationship in the light of old challenges and new opportunities, and what would be the implications for Pakistan and the region. First, a brief historical review. The US-Pakistan relations have, over the past 6 decades, served some important interests of the two countries during 3 periods of their close alliance. The first one was in the early years of the Cold War. The second one was in the dying days of the Cold War during the Afghan Jihad against the Soviets. And now the third and the current one since 9/11. It has been a difficult relationship as both countries have faced a dilemma in dealing with each other. Washington did not see clear long-term strategic interests in Pakistan, but found its services valuable in meeting specific and sporadic geopolitical and security challenges from time to time. As for Pakistan, the relationship became part of its organizing idea. In the early years of Pakistan's existence, Pakistan was struggling for survival and needed the United States more than perhaps Washington needed it, and convinced itself that given its geopolitical location, it had a fixed and unchanging importance of Washington and wanted a strategic relationship with the United States. The United States did not share that view and did not want to give any long-term commitment to Pakistan, especially against India. But through hyperbole, that's the hallmark of American public policy pronouncements, and with the agreements that gave vaguely defined commitments to Pakistan, the United States kept Pakistan under an illusion of a strategic alliance, as it did not want to lose Pakistan's support. In time, Pakistan discovered the reality and learned to do the same with Washington. Pakistan also misrepresented its policies to satisfy Washington, as it did not want to lose American support. In other words, the relationship had become expedient, and to some degree both countries were taking advantage of each other. The result was mistrust and misperceptions in the relationship that have become a recurring feature for some time now. What has been the fundamental problem? The fundamental problem has been that interests of the two countries often differed, and even when their interests converged, their policies, perceptions, and politics differed. In each of their alliances, they have been allies on one issue and antagonists in other. They lacked strategic convergence. Their relationship was by and large transactional, but the irony was it was dealing with strategic issues. That was the biggest dilemma. It was dealing with strategic issues in a transactional setup without a strategic framework. So there was a considerable room for misunderstanding and differences. That made it very, very difficult to manage the relationship. So they both lost as well as gained from the relationship. Let me give you examples. From the late 50s until the mid-60s, that is during their first alliance, the two countries were allies in advancing Washington's containment policy against Moscow. Pakistan received substantial economic and security assistance, which helped stabilize the fledgling country as it struggled for survival. But the US relationship with India suffered, and Pakistan's democratic process was complicated by the military, which had been strengthened by the United States. In the 80s, Pakistan helped the United States defeat the Soviets in Afghanistan, hastening the collapse of the Soviet Union. But under the umbrella of cooperation, Pakistan went on to complete its nuclear program, which was very vital for it. But it was in breach of US non-proliferation objectives. And then, as a consequence of the war in Afghanistan, Pakistan was having to left with the jihadists that the war had created. And they created havoc. So both Pakistan and United States lost as well as gained from both their alliances in the early part and as well as in the 80s. The relationship has been particularly difficult since 9/11 as they got entangled with the Afghanistan war. It's never easy to handle a war-related relationship, especially a war that is not going well. Pakistan had provided valuable cooperation in the war on terrorism, including critical logistic support to the war effort in Afghanistan, but the war started failing not long after it started. And Washington started blaming it on the Taliban sanctuaries in Pakistan. It forced Pakistan to take action, which Pakistan did, and ended up provoking a serious backlash by way of emergence of Pakistani Taliban, TTP, in 2007, who wreaked havoc in Pakistan. What went wrong in the war? If you ask me, many things. Not only did the US military campaign in Afghanistan lack a political strategy, but in the rush to war, there was little effort to comprehend the nature of the threat or the enemy. Along with the lack of strategic imperative, incoherent war aims, insufficient resources, and poor execution, the war effort was also undermined by a shift in attention and resources to another war of dubious necessity. That's the Iraq War.
Choice. War of choice.
The Taliban-centric strategy of both Afghanistan war and the war on terrorism also reflected a poor understanding of what had been going on not only in Afghanistan but also in Pakistan in the previous 2 decades since the Afghan Jihad ended. There had been a rise in the influence of the Taliban, especially in the areas along Pakistan-Afghanistan border. War planners should have known that the Taliban were not going to fight. They were going to run away to Pakistan. Tribal areas where they had influence, where had their affiliations, and where they had connections. The reality is, the war did not start failing because of the Taliban resurgence. Rather, the Taliban were resurgent because of the war's failure. Apart from a bad strategy, America had bad partners in Afghanistan. Taliban thrived on grievance and instability caused by poor governance and corruption. The mainly rural population of Afghanistan was sympathetic to them, not so much for ideological reasons, but as an alternative to bad governance, and for security and protection against the corrupt and oppressive police and strongmen. There was no real Afghan effort to defeat the Taliban. Afghanistan's experience with democracy was too weak and superficial to resolve Afghanistan's fundamental challenges. Sensing that the war was failing and fearing that there will be another American departure and a replay of 1990, when the United States walked away from the region, Pakistan started banking on the Taliban as a hedge if Afghanistan descended into chaos again. But there were other issues as well. The extraordinary new relationship between the United States and India, and Washington's nuclear deal with India, and refusal to give Pakistan the same treatment had caused disappointment and concern in Pakistan. So had the statements in the US expressing concern about the safety of Pakistan's nuclear program. The perceived preferential treatment given to India had fostered perceptions in Pakistan, right and wrong, or wrong, that the United States and India were collaborating to destabilize Pakistan and get at its nuclear assets. This became a kind of a public fear and public concern and anxiety whipped up by the media also. And with the increasing presence and influence of India in Afghanistan and the growing relations between the two countries, Pakistan Army started seeing the Indian threat relocating to Afghanistan. In Pakistan's security concerns, Afghanistan and India had merged, raising a fear of encirclement. In other words, in Pakistani perceptions, an Afghanistan was being created that was not consistent with Pakistan's security and strategic interests. On top of that, the war's blowback had brought enormous harm to Pakistan's security, economy, and stability. Pakistan felt hurt by the death of nearly 7,000 of its security personnel at the hands of terrorists who were retaliating for the Pakistan Army's support for what they saw was America's war. War had lost public support in Pakistan. With the Afghans' failure inside Afghanistan, poor strategy by Washington, and rapid changes of command, and with Taliban sanctuaries in Pakistan, and the support that was slowly being given now by Iran and Russia, the war started going Taliban's way. And with the announcement by President Obama during his second term of withdrawal from Afghanistan and change in the combat role of US forces, the Taliban attacks, especially by Haqqani network, escalated, for which Pakistan was blamed in Washington by politicians and media alike. As the war began faltering beyond repair, the United States Army particularly found a good scapegoat in Pakistan, blamed for providing sanctuaries to the Taliban. Pentagon, that used to be the sole reliable ally of Pakistan, also turned against it. When President Trump came to power, the US-Pakistan relations was already troubled. He was persuaded to give one last try to the military solution by intensifying the military operations against the Taliban and by putting pressure on Pakistan. So there was a coordinated strategy to put pressure on Pakistan and also escalate the war in Afghanistan. It didn't work. By mid-2018, the curtain had come down on the military option, and the United States was looking for talks with the Taliban. This also coincided with Imran Khan's accession to power. Zalmay Khalilzad, the newly appointed special representative to Afghanistan, doubled up the pressure on Pakistan and also began dangling the prize of good relations between the United States and Pakistan to Imran Khan. All three sides, the United States, Pakistan, and the Taliban, started shifting from their previous positions. Pakistan was expected to put pressure on the Taliban, and it obliged. Imran Khan had decided to change the policy towards Pakistan and to seek a new relationship with the United States. But Pakistan's influence with the Taliban only worked to the extent of bringing them to the negotiating table in Doha. But Washington felt Pakistan needed to do more. That was the background to a letter written last December by President Trump seeking Imran Khan's help. The United States nonetheless kept up the pressure on Pakistan and in fact raised the ante by opposing CPAC, criticizing Pakistan's relations with China and condemning the presence and continued operation of Pakistani jihadist organizations. It expressed reservations over Pakistan's approach to IMF. The United States also doubled up pressure on Pakistan through the international financial watchdog FATF. Pakistan was placed on its grey list for shortcomings in dealing with money laundering and terrorism financing. Threat of being blacklisted loomed with a deadline to reform by October 2019. Security assistance was suspended, including what the United States had owed Pakistan previously, approximately $2 billion. Given Pakistan's difficult economic situation, it had no option but to change its tack. American economic power and military might was overwhelming, and Pakistan could benefit from its friendship with Washington or lose from alienating Americans. Pakistan had realized that its relationship with China, however vital and strategic, was not the answer to all its problems, and that a sole reliance on China could lead to a relationship of dependency, as it had in the case of relationship with the United States. American influence in international financial institutions still mattered, and Washington could still use its influence with India for crisis management in the region from time to time. So Pakistan brought pressure on Taliban to be flexible in the talks with the United States. It also realized that this so-called refrain that the Afghan peace process has to be Afghan-led and Afghan-owned can be meaningless if Pakistan did not recognize the legitimacy and centrality of the Kabul government. Mere pious expressions of goodwill would not be enough. Pakistan had to show its sincerity with actions, and it did show. Accordingly, it invited Afghan president to visit Pakistan last June, and a good understanding was established between him and Imran Khan. Chief of Army General Bajwa visited Kabul. Islamabad also accommodated another demand of Washington, action against jihadist organization. Among other things, it arrested Hafiz Saeed. As Pakistan responded positively by helping the US-Taliban talks along, the United States reciprocated, especially as clarity began emerging in Washington about exiting from Afghanistan. So the way was paved for President Trump's invitation to Imran Khan last June to visit the United States. The invitation to the White House and words of praise for Imran Khan in the Oval Office were more of a reward than an indication of things to come. Imran Khan went to Washington for a reset in the relations, hoping it would become an ally again, but it seemed Washington was not in a hurry to oblige. Washington seemed to have worked out a new strategy towards Pakistan. The United States saw two important interests in Pakistan to focus on in the immediate future: Afghanistan and counterterrorism, that included action against the jihadists, and had developed some useful leverages that had been tested and found working. For now, the pressure was taken off, but if Pakistan did not oblige, it could return. The relations had been reset by Washington, but to its own preferences, at least for the near term. The talks went very well. Certain demands may have been made, especially about the Taliban and action against the jihadists as well as transnational terrorists like Al Qaeda and ISIS. but no quid pro quo was offered to Pakistan. Reportedly, Pakistan's offers of help were satisfactory, but the United States made no promises other than possibly offering inducements that if Pakistan obliged, there would be prospects of a vaguely defined reinvigorated relationship which may include a release of suspended aid and economic and trade ties. Pakistan's strategy will be to oblige the United States, but it faces a dilemma in dealing with the Taliban. It's not going to be easy. Pakistani pressure on the Taliban so far has apparently worked only to the extent of facilitating US-Taliban part of the agreement, linking US withdrawal to Taliban assurances that the territory under their control would not be allowed to be used by terrorist organizations like Al Qaeda and ISIS. What remains to be worked out is the timetable for withdrawal on which both Washington and Pakistan are on the same page, but Taliban are not, but they are likely to come round to that. But so far, so good. What remains uncertain and unclear is the second part of the agreement that would be worked out by an intra-Afghan dialogue and would deal with the ceasefire and future political setup. Kabul is not united. It has no common approach or a peace plan. There are serious differences between Pashtun and the erstwhile Northern Alliance that would make it very difficult for intra-Afghan dialogue to succeed. And that will define the next stage of the Afghan conflict. Let me now come to the final segment of my talk as to the future and address the important question of what the future holds for the relationship and its implications for Pakistan and for the region. Let me outline the context in which the United States-Pakistan relationship will likely operate in the future. We are talking here of three things: the geostrategic landscape, the regional environment, and the domestic dynamics within Pakistan. That's the context in which US-Pakistan relations are going to operate. Briefly, we are talking here of the lengthening strategic shadow of China, the US containment of China through Indo-Pacific and possibly South Asia, and how Pakistan could be caught in the crossfire in all this, the US-Iran tensions, the rise of India's power and ambitions, and Pakistan's domestic challenges. Not to mention security issues like terrorist threat to the United States and global security, which the abandoned American war in Afghanistan could resolve only partially. Last but not least, Afghanistan's elusive struggle for peace and stability, which intersects with all these factors. Let me address the geopolitical element first. Geopolitically speaking, and this is my view, Washington faces two main challenges in South Asia. One relates to China and the other to Afghanistan. For one, it needs India, and for the other, it needs Pakistan. Washington may not try to mix the two by opposing China-Pakistan relations through opposition to CPAC or other measures, because it will alienate China, whose cooperation is needed in Afghanistan. China, United States, and Russia are already in an ongoing dialogue over Afghanistan. Their last meeting was in Beijing in July, where they appreciated Pakistan's role. They issued a statement. Secondly, opposition to CPAC will weaken Pakistan and destabilize Pakistan, which is not in Washington's interest. In fact, Washington may feel it's important for Pakistan to have good relations with China up to a point, as they serve some of Washington's own interests, as China supplements US pressure on Pakistan over the Taliban and the Jihadists, which is a shared interest of the United States and China, by exercising influence over Pakistan. Similarly, China feels it's important for Pakistan to have good relations with the United States up to a point, as it serves some of China's own interests. So geopolitics, in my view, may not play as big a part in the future US-Pakistan relations as other factors, as Pakistan's regional and domestic challenges. Pakistan will be in the eye of a developing storm as it faces on one side prospects of failure of Afghanistan and on the other continued pressure from an assertive and dominant India, while it continues to cope with its internal challenges, especially Pakistan's own struggle against extremism and terrorism, and efforts at stabilization of economy and strengthening of democracy. Prime Minister Modi's move on Kashmir on August 5th has presented Pakistan with new challenges. The United States would be watching the India-Pakistan situation and how it affects the Afghan peace process. That's why President Trump has been talking to both Prime Minister Modi and Prime Minister Imran Khan. The United States is concerned about any impact of India-Pakistan situation on Pakistan's Afghanistan policy. Will Pakistan have to move troops away from the western border, and how will it affect the ground situation in Kashmir? Pressure on Pakistan to act against the jihadists will also redouble, as they can provoke an incident in the current India-Pakistan tensions with its consequences for Afghan peace process. The future US-Pakistan relations is going to face more challenges than opportunities. Any opportunity or hope we had of friendly relations between India and Pakistan, and with that a boost in economic cooperation in the region, has been lost for a long time by the August 5th action by Prime Minister Modi. In Pakistan, there is a strong domestic pressure on the government to support Kashmir, but Pakistan will have to be very careful. It knows international community is not going to help much on Kashmir. Putting all the onus on bilateral avenues, and bilaterally India has slammed the door to negotiations by making Kashmir an internal issue. So there is a limit to what Pakistan can do without provoking a conflict with India, especially as it is fearful that India, for its own reasons, might provoke a conflict. The only viable option for Pakistan is to restrict diplomatic, political and economic ties with India. The relations will thus remain in the cold storage indefinitely, while the risk of conflict with India will be ever present. Can Pakistan handle Afghanistan and India simultaneously? A successful navigation of these challenges by Pakistan would require good relations with all big powers, the United States, China and Russia, and Pakistan will have to accommodate their interests. Will the United States help or hinder Pakistan's response to these foreign policy and internal challenges? That would very much depend on whether, in American perceptions, Pakistan itself is facilitating or complicating America's own interests in the region. This is the central equation here. For America, the old challenge of handling the relationship continues. That is, how to deal with the fact that the United States and Pakistan are allies on one issue and adversaries in another. In the past, the United States resolved that dilemma by focusing on the core issue on which there was agreement and sidestepped the point of difference, got cooperation from Pakistan, walked away and punished Pakistan on the issue on which there were differences. Now the United States cannot walk away, given its other interests in the region. So how do you handle the convergence and divergence simultaneously. That is the central dilemma in the relationship as I see it. The United States may walk away from the war like before, but it cannot walk away from the region unlike in the past. It's heavily invested in the region, and what Pakistan does affects its interests and vice versa. Not only because of America's direct interest in Pakistan in security issues like extremism and terrorism and Afghanistan war, but also because of the impact of India-Pakistan relations on Washington's own interests, relations with India. Not to mention how China-Pakistan relations affect the US strategy towards China. Such interlocking issues make public policy on Pakistan difficult, especially as Pakistan's public image and political support had diminished in Washington. Imran Khan's visit has revived it a bit, but it's too early to tell if this change will be enduring. We may see revival, but not a resurgence of relations. The United States needs to put in place a new Pakistan policy post-Afghanistan exit. As of now, we can only speculate about it. All we know is the old policy. When people ask me, does the United States have a policy on Pakistan, the answer that I used to give is no. The United States has a policy towards China, the United States has a policy towards India, the United States has a policy towards Jihadists, the United States has a policy towards Afghanistan. Pakistan's policy is a derivative of the four policies. It has no independent policy towards Pakistan. But this cannot go on because now we are entering a different phase. These four policies used to be used as a pressure point against Pakistan to get its cooperation on Afghanistan. But now the need for a pressure point has declined because the United States has to have a different approach towards Pakistan. Also, the question of Taliban sanctuaries is no longer as salient because that was salient only when there was a hope of a military solution. That hope is gone. Does that make Pakistan's life any easier? No. The Taliban may be Pakistan's main card, but they are a mixed blessing and pose Pakistan many dilemmas. The Taliban are among the few Afghan elements who are better disposed towards Pakistan. The Northern Alliance elements have been anti-Pakistan. Pakistan's main objective will be, if possible, not to let the Taliban come to power in Kabul, but also not to leave them out of power. Both possibilities will be headache for Pakistan. Taliban in power in Kabul will have a reverse strategic depth, inciting the radicalization of at least parts of Pakistan, and disenfranchised Taliban will like to tear away at Pakistan's tribal areas, and that's not a good outcome. Pakistan's other dilemma is that it's not in a position to throw out the Taliban either. Taliban have a constituency in Pakistan. First the Pashtun sentiment, then linkages with Pakistan's religious parties and elements who can create trouble inside Pakistan. So alienating Pakistan by expelling them is not an option. Of course, Pakistan can ask them to shift their operations inside Afghanistan, but that's not going to be easy. Only if Kabul were united and realized the importance of cooperating with Pakistan, then Kabul would have safeguarded Pakistan's interests in return for Islamabad's help in regard to Taliban. But Pakistan has to rely on Taliban because Afghans are in disarray and have no coherent policy towards Pakistan or towards Taliban. Nonetheless, Pakistan has no choice but to support the Ghani government and also the United States-led peace process to see if the worst outcomes could be avoided. It's a tough balancing act for Pakistan navigating its relationship with Kabul, Taliban and the United States. Now, where are the US-Taliban peace talks headed? In deference to its own interests and the US demands, Pakistan, like the United States, reject Taliban insistence on quick withdrawal of US forces. They feel the withdrawal should be in phases. That way, President Trump does not have to be embarrassed by sudden spike in major violence before 2020. And for Pakistan, it allows Pakistan to persuade Taliban to engage with Kabul for a political settlement, thus minimizing the chances of an explosive outbreak of civil war. Pakistan will like a slow, controlled exit of the United States, giving time to Pakistan to focus on economic stabilization and intra-Afghan political settlement. My view is America may not totally withdraw from Afghanistan. It may withdraw from the war, but not from Afghanistan. President Trump has to come up with a withdrawal plan that does what is politically necessary for his re-election to the extent permissible by the military. I doubt he will declare victory. He will explain it in terms of getting the United States out of unending wars, saving American lives, and saving American money. Withdrawal from the war will be more in a political sense than a military sense. For now, it must just take some steps and reach agreement with the Taliban that would enable it to announce the end of the war and reduce its military presence, but not leave entirely. All this attention being showered on Pakistan is not just to ensure Pakistan's cooperation, that there is a decent interval before a new conflict starts, like it did in Vietnam, but that also in any new conflict, Pakistan does not go against Washington's interests. Surely, let me conclude, Pakistan has other interests as well in Pakistan. The United States needs more cooperation with Pakistan, not only to resolve Afghanistan situation and to get Pakistan's help in fighting transnational terrorists like Al Qaeda and ISIS, but also because stability in South Asia is one of the goals that the United States has. Recent statements from General Dunford and McKenzie have emphasized that maintaining good relations with Pakistan is important in the defense field and is important as a means of ensuring stability in the region. Pakistan's nuclear assets and their safety also remain a national concern for Washington. The United States would not push Pakistan to the wall, causing its collapse and the possibility of its radical takeover of Pakistan nuclear weapons. It would like to have good relations with Pakistan. Bottom line is that Pakistan and the United States faced many shared challenges which neither can solve alone. They need each other, but have to go beyond the past paradigm of the relationship in which each side was using the other to advance its own interests, often at the expense of others' interests. They need to have a more sustainable relationship where two countries have more realistic expectations of each other and serve their mutual interests to the extent permissible by their own respective national interests. Thank you.